New York, June 19, 1932. Bay Ridge, Brooklyn loses its liquor baron when Charles Vannie Higgins goes on the spot. Cocky, conceited, smart-mouthed, Vannie was the type of gangster James Cagney played in the movies. Well-dressed, he drove fancy cars and even piloted his own airplane. Higgins got into bootlegging in 1926 with the financial assistance of O'Neill Madden. 5 years later, he was the undisputed liquor king of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Assisting him in his rise were his two top lieutenants, Bill Bailey and Bailey's brother-in-law Bob Benson. In addition to some of the fastest rum-running boats along the coast, Higgins' success was partly due to the fact that he landed his stuff at Long Beach, Long Island, where he had that town's police force on his payroll. In addition to his criminal activities, Higgins also had a small fleet of taxis cruising Bay Ridge. It was assumed that his taxis were transporting more than fares throughout the borough. Around the time Higgins' star was rising, corpses started popping up in and around Bay Ridge. The first noted one was Louis Wallinger. Wallinger had a gang record and was selling booze out of his house. At 3 a.m. on December 14, 1926, two men stopped in to buy some whiskey, but Wallinger supposedly sent them away. They returned 3 hours later. Wallinger's wife said that she heard the men arguing and then she heard shots. The men fled as Wallinger stumbled into his bathroom and dropped dead. Higgins' lieutenant Bill Bailey was arrested for the shooting. The police had an open and shut case as the man with Bailey told police that Bailey was the killer. Higgins paid for Bailey's defense and even took the stand and stated that he had been playing cards with Bailey when the murder took place. Bailey beat the rap. Police began keeping a dossier on Higgins. 2 months following the Wallinger murder, Sing Sing alumnus Edward Fallon was lured to a Bay Ridge corner on February 22, 1927. Since his release from prison the previous year, Fallon had been a bootlegger. As he stood on the corner, a Cadillac pulled up and some men inside opened fire. The first shots crashed into a store's display case. Fallon started running as the second volley was fired. One shot pierced his side, another his leg. The bootlegger managed to run into a vestibule of a nearby building before collapsing dead. According to police, Fallon was a friend of Higgins's, but the two had had a falling out. 2 more 1927 murders that police thought Higgins might know something about included Bay Ridge bootlegger Michael McNamara, whose body was found in an empty lot in Queens on June 11. Like Fallon, police declared that McNamara was a one-time friend of Higgins. 6 months later, on December 22, Salvatore Sam Orlando was driving through Bay Ridge with another man when a car sped up behind his blowing its horn. Orlando made the fatal mistake of pulling over. Once he was at the curb, the other car pulled up alongside his and two men opened fire with sawed-off shotguns. Orlando slumped over the steering wheel, mortally wounded. A search of the car produced 3 bottles of whiskey. Sometimes the guns were pointed at Higgins. In early 1928, Higgins was shot by a cop while conducting some business in Baltimore. 3 months later, on June 3, he, Benson, Bailey and another guy named Sorensen were sitting in one of Higgins's taxis when a sedan pulled up and a gunman opened fire. The 4 men jumped from the taxi and ran to safety without getting hit. 2 months later, Higgins, Benson and Bailey were arrested for the Orlando murder from the previous December. They were discharged after a few days. An article stated that the triumvirate were known throughout Gangland as the Unholy Three, a name garnered from a crime film of the same name. March 18, 1928 found Higgins, Bailey and Benson on the town with their wives. They ended up at a bar called the Owl's Head Tavern along with a bootlegging partner from Baltimore named Paul Eckert and another Higgins man named John Donegan. At about 1 a.m. the next morning, the group walked to another speakeasy about a block away. Drinking inside was another Brooklyn bootlegger known as Terrible Tommy Connell, who also went by the name of Kilduff. With him was his right-hand man Daniel Maloney. By day, Maloney was a cop. At night he was Connell's muscle. On this particular night he was armed to the teeth. In addition to his service revolver, he had 2 other handguns and a sawed-off shotgun with a pistol grip. It was believed that Higgins and Connell were partners in some bootlegging deals, but weren't getting along. After chatting for a while, they all stepped outside and began walking towards Higgins's car. When they reached the front of the Owl's Head Tavern, things took a turn for the worse. The wives realized that something was about to go down because they started screaming and banging on the tavern door to get inside for shelter. As the bartender opened the door, the bullets began to fly. Connell hobbled into the Owl's Head with a leg wound while Maloney fired at Higgins and his entourage. An off-duty cop, who heard the shooting, ran up and ordered Maloney to drop his weapon. Maloney took a shot at him and missed. The cop fired off 4 rounds and Maloney dropped to the sidewalk mortally wounded. Higgins and his Confederates all took off running. Both Higgins and Eckert ran into the arms of responding cops. Connell was found inside the Owl's Head and the 3 gangsters were taken in. The trio was charged with felonious assault, but nothing came of the charges. More unwanted press came Higgins's way the following year when on September 30th, 1930 a reporter showed up at one of Higgins's landing sites at Long Beach, Long Island. A cop approached the newspaperman and threatened him with arrest if he didn't leave. Just then, Higgins pulled up with some of his cohorts. When the reporter ran over to get the license plate number, Higgins and his gang proceeded to beat him up. As he was getting throttled, the victim identified himself as a newspaperman and the attack stopped. Pulling a roll of bills out of his pocket, Higgins peeled off a 20 and flipped it at the guy, informing him that he would be killed if he wrote about the encounter. Higgins's threats weren't idle. Just 4 days before, on September 26, another Brooklyn bootlegger named Leo Steinberg had landed a shipment at Long Beach after having been warned never to do so by Higgins. Steinberg had a shipment due to land early that morning. He and a partner waited nervously for the shipment to arrive. Unfortunately for them, it was late. Later that afternoon, Higgins and Benson saw Steinberg in Long Beach.
"We told you not to work here. What the hell are you doing here?"
Higgins demanded. Before Steinberg could answer, he was hustled into Higgins's car. He was never seen again. Underworld rumor had it that Higgins killed him and tossed his body into the ocean. On May 21, 1931, a blue Cadillac pulled up to a Midtown Manhattan hospital. 2 guys carried Higgins to the lobby, said, "Goodbye, Van," and ran from the premises. Doctors were called to care for Higgins, who was bleeding profusely from several stab wounds. The gangster lied to the cops about what happened, but they discovered that the stabbing took place at a Midtown speakeasy called the Blossom Heath Inn. It was later determined that the man who wielded the knife was Higgins' own Lieutenant Bob Benson. Police looked for Benson but were unable to find him. Their search ended 5 months later. On October 26, 1931, Benson had dinner in Manhattan's Little Italy with 4 or 5 men. Afterwards, as the group was leaving the restaurant, someone came up behind Benson and sent a bullet into his brain. He dropped at the curb while the men scattered. Police immediately searched for Higgins and Bailey, who went into hiding. Neither showed up at Benson's funeral, but it was noted that during the ceremony, an airplane containing 2 men circled the cemetery. Picked up for the murder were underworld characters Salvatore Spitali and Irving Bitts, whom Higgins had began dealing with. The duo was paraded in front of witnesses and released when none could identify them. A week and a half later, on November 6, Higgins and Bailey, accompanied by their lawyers, strolled into the district attorney's office. "I understand the police and district attorney's office have been looking for Bailey and me," Higgins said to Assistant DA Saul Price. "Well, here we are." "Yes," the Assistant DA responded. "The police suspect you of participation in the Benson murder." "We know nothing about it," Higgins replied. The Assistant DA then asked if they were among the party that dined with Benson just before he was killed. "On advice from our lawyers, we refuse to make any further statement." Both men were arrested. After spending about 5 days in jail, they were released. Higgins was immediately rearrested for violating the Volstead Act by bringing booze into Long Beach, Long Island. In all, 17 men, including Long Beach's chief of police, were named in the indictment. Over the course of 10 days in January of 1932, prosecutors tried to prove that Higgins and various members of the Long Beach Police Department were running a bootleg ring. Top witnesses included the reporter who was assaulted in 1930, a Hempstead policeman who told of taking a few bribes, and of being told that Higgins had Long Beach all sewed up. There was also a Coast Guard captain who testified that he was offered 50 grand to keep out of Long Beach. After deliberating for an hour, the jury found Higgins and the other defendants not guilty. As 1932 rolled on, the seemingly invincible Vannie Higgins was expanding to New Jersey. He also continued his dealings with Salvatore Spitali and Irving Bitts, a relationship that may have been deadly. On the evening of June 19th, Higgins met Spitali at the Knights of Columbus Hall just off of Brooklyn's Prospect Park. Each of the gangsters had a daughter who performed in a recital at the hall. Some reports have Spitali leaving early. Others that the men exited together. Either way, as Higgins left the hall and approached his car, his family a number of steps behind him, a man approached and the two started talking. The man then motioned to two other men who were standing nearby. Higgins went to greet them but suddenly, realizing that he was on the spot, took off running as the men pulled out guns. Several shots were fired, two of which found their mark in the gangster. The one that would prove fatal pierced his left side and plowed through his intestines and lodged in his stomach. The other went into his left shoulder and exited his armpit. The gunmen dropped their pistols and escaped as Higgins ran around a corner and collapsed alongside a building stoop. Higgins was taken to the hospital where he believed that he would pull through. When questioned by the cops, he answered,
"The lousy rats. I know them. I'll get them."
Detectives kept pressing him for information.
"I'll get out of here. I'll take care of those rats myself."
But it wasn't to be. Up until the end, Higgins refused to answer any questions. He took the names of his killers to the grave. Speculation to who bumped him off ran from New Jersey gangsters to South Brooklyn mobster Little Augie Pisano. Salvatore Spitali was also a chief suspect. Since Higgins claimed to know who was behind it, possibly it was a double cross by someone he trusted. An associate like Spitali. Who do you think was behind Vannie Higgins' murder? Leave your comments below. If you want to read about more New York City gangsters who were bumped off during Prohibition, check out these ebooks. Links are listed below.